Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the GBYWN Australian podcast. Here today I've got an exciting interview for all of you guys out there. Today I will be talking with none other than a former GBYWN Australian Heavyweight Champion, former ICWS Heavyweight Champion. I'm talking about the one, the only, the journeyman of backyard wrestling, Nightstalker, Daniel Johnston. How you going, my friend?
Hello, hello.
Good to have you here. It's been, only a week, not even a week since I started the podcast, and you were one of the first people that I wanted to talk to because I know, and everyone out there knows, that this is going to be one quality interview.
Yeah, well, I mean, that goes without saying.
For sure. Now, DJ, I wanted to start off things by, let's just start right from the beginning. The UWF. And for those out there who are unaware, that's what the ICWS used to be before it became the ICWS. Is it Ultimate Wrestling Federation?
It was the Ultimate Wrestling Federation, so high marks for a really original name there.
Yes, well, I mean, I was in XCW, Extreme Championship Wrestling, so you beat me on that, that's for sure. But very humble beginnings, I must say. You know, wrestling in the front yard of a house on a couple of mattresses. Thinking back to those days compared to now, you know, how does it make you feel to go from where you were to where you're at now?
Well, I mean, should I give a bit of backstory into the UWF?
Yes.
I mean, because I remember before the UWF started, me and MC Cruel and a few other people like that, Chris Zeppelin, who would later become ICWS General Manager, Knuckles, started like sort of almost like a shoot fighting ring at school. So at lunchtime people would literally gather around and we would try to get the tap out, you know. Yeah. But that soon got shut down, and so I spoke to my uncle, who is experienced in the media, worked in Japan, journalist, stuff like that. He talked about the idea of putting together a DVD for us. And so from there, we basically developed the UWF and our original wrestling personas around the idea of doing this DVD and doing it up as if it was presented for a TV show.
Yeah.
So, and we just wrestled on the front lawn. There was only me, Nick James, MC Cruel, and Knuckles. Chris Zeppelin did the announcing duties, so that's how he warped into becoming the general manager later on.
Yeah.
And I remember that day, that, you know, that excitement that you get. We were all just so excited, and the DVD actually turned out great. I mean, like, if you watched it today, the wrestling still wouldn't hold up, but in terms of actual production values, the DVD is still probably, I'd say, one of the highest quality available for backyard wrestling as a genre. There was no instances of people stumbling around or fumbling around, because everything that wasn't a solidly executed move was basically cut out through clever editing.
Gotcha.
And then we had my American friend Chad, who would then debut as Chad Yo.
Yep.
Come in and do commentary, because I thought it would be cool to have an American doing the commentary. Thought that would be a cool little touch.
Yep.
So then we got together and did that, and then the UWF was off to the races by that point, but I mean, and then we went on to wrestling on the mattresses and things like that. Chris Zeppelin sort of stepped into that role that my uncle had filled, doing the DVDs.
Yep.
Because he's very tech savvy like that. So, I mean, compared to then and now, obviously it's night and day. I've had a lot more training. I sort of feel like I have to be careful of what I say, but, you know, for all intents and purposes, I consider myself to be good enough to perform on professional shows.
Yes.
So I consider myself a professional level wrestler.
Yeah.
But I don't consider myself a professional wrestler because I'm obviously not competing.
Competing in a professional setting.
Yeah. So, in terms of the training and the knowledge and the experience that I've got since then, it's definitely night and day for me as a wrestler. But, I mean, as much as things change, things stay the same as well. I still get the same excitement and the same euphoria and the same, you know, sort of like butterflies.
Waking up in the morning.
Event,
you see, there's got that air of excitement.
It's
in the
almost
air.
it's like kind of Christmas Day or a birthday. It's like a special occasion for me. So
Yeah.
you still definitely, I find personally, even as other people grow out of it and stuff, naturally with the course of time. Even as other people kind of grow out of it naturally,
Yes.
which happens,
Yeah.
you know, I still sort of really get that excitement.
Yeah, it still feels like Christmas morning to me when I wake up and I know that there's a show on. It's been like that for years, and I don't think it's going to change anytime soon.
So, but, I mean, to actually sort of run down the differences between that era and where I am now, that would take a whole podcast in and of itself.
Yeah.
So I don't think that we can really... And there's really not that much to say about UWF. I mean, if you've seen any footage or any like pictures of it, it kind of speaks for itself. All the major players that would one day surface in ICWS/WZWA, you know, they all the major players from the original UWF continued on after that point, so they'll get their mentions regardless of how much we say about that. But
Yeah.
As a launching point to where everything is now, I would dare say that WZWA in large part would not exist without UWF having started. A combination of XCW and UWF. WZWA is sort of like the amalgamation of them two organizations, in my
Agreed.
opinion. So,
Yeah. And what led the UWF to become the ICWS?
well, basically, we were sick and tired of copping flack from the yarders over east, because a lot of us at that time, we were actually quite disillusioned with the product that WWE, etc., was offering, and we were mostly just fans of backyard wrestling. We would take an LCWA event or a IYHWA MV over like a WWE show any day at that point, because it was relatable. It was people that you could relate to. It was cool. It was something that we could actually aspire to achieve ourselves.
Yeah.
Whereas WWE, or even at that time EPW and things like that, was an unattainable goal at that point. So,
Yeah.
but we still, there was lots of people who were really nice to us. Chris Cryptic, Rusty, a few other people like that.
Yeah.
Tommy Taboo. There was also a lot of people that were just dickheads. Bryn, Niven, you know, all the usual suspects. I'm sure if I rattled off and name dropped everyone who was a cunt, you know,
We'd be sitting here all
we'd
day.
be sitting here all day. So eventually we just thought, you know what they're saying is not without merit though. If we want to improve ourselves, we need to actually build a proper base.
Yeah.
So we begged and begged and begged my dad for months to do it. There was nowhere to put it. Our family friends, Peter and Melissa. Peter's now recently passed away, unfortunately. He is credited with ICWS and everything that came after it by extension existing, because they had a paddock out the back of their house. He said, you can put it here.
Yep.
And, you know, we were always welcome in their home, so we could host a show whenever we wanted. And the paddock gave us the room and also the privacy to do an event without bothering anyone else in the main house.
Yeah.
So, he actually physically, he and my dad built the base, went and bought the material and physically built it. And then we decided naturally that if we were going to be rebooting with like a base, we might as well give ourselves kind of a more, less generic, kind of a bit more,
A better name.
bit more relevant name.
Yeah.
4-letter acronyms were the rage back then
Oh,
in
of
backyard
course.
wrestling.
Yeah.
So we thought, you know, IYHWA, SCWS. We'll call ourselves the Inner City Wrestling Syndicate. We'll be ICWS. It'll sound cool. And, you know, so that was basically where that came about. And we sort of adopted a few more formatting ideas that we saw from around us. Like in the UWF, for example, we'd have one person that would fill the role of the referee that whole event, and that would normally be Chris Zeppelin. And we wouldn't have people cheering and shit like that, because we wanted to get that professional production value that we had on the first DVD. But then once we turned it into ICWS, it was kind of we would have all the boys out there as the crowd, and like we'd take turns being the ref. So it kind of loosened up from a production standpoint, which allowed us to kind of have these more free-flowing, more creatively accessible shows. So everyone felt a lot more comfortable being on it. Whereas before it was kind of a lot like you'd have to go on there and kind of almost like play a part in a short film. Now it was like we were actually going out and doing a wrestling event, and the fact that it was being filmed and put online was secondary.
Yeah.
To that, the actual point of it was now the social aspect and the physical aspect of going out there and performing a show.
I often remember something along the lines of you guys would do a show for the music video at the end of it, cut up all the best bits, and that's what your focus was, to make it look like.
As long as it came out good on the MV, it was good.
Gotcha.
But then eventually the natural realization came with a bit of age, once we started getting sort of 16, 17 years of age, that what we really wanted to do was actually be good wrestlers. So in order to do that, we'd have to go through that transitional period of sort of having those less than stellar shows so that we could build up to becoming good. And I would dare say that once it hit its peak, in its prime, ICWS was at the level of IYH or any other fed like that, SCWS. Maybe not in terms of sheer athleticism. I mean, a lot of those guys did like a lot of high spots, plenty of dives and stuff, but from a technical standpoint, from a psychology standpoint, ICWS, we eventually did evolve into what I thought was a really well-rounded group of performers, and everyone eventually learned how to play up their strengths. I mean, but of course, like, the difference from the ground to the base is astronomical. I mean, once we built that base, already from that point, the show...
So you really needed to get to the next level.
Yeah, it doubled in quality from that first show, which if you go and watch it now, it's still a piece of shit, like, comparatively, but if you compare that again to UWF standard, it was a step above.
You can see the change in the level.
Yeah.
You know, the playing field's all changed.
Definitely.
Everyone's stepped it up a notch, and it would have helped you guys to be better wrestlers. Like, I talk to these kids from Geelong.
Is that the
XCW that do it in the garage on the mattresses?
Yeah.
I say to them,
I've tried to watch a couple of theirs.
It's hard, and I've told them it's pretty much unwatchable. And I've told them all you guys need to do is to evolve from where you're at now. Put those mattresses, get some tires, build a base somewhere. And I guarantee you, as soon as you do that, your quality of wrestling will go up.
And I'll tell you why it'll go up, so that people that are at that stage where they're wondering, why do we get a lot of negative feedback and stuff, we're trying hard. First of all, the most important thing, if you're doing an event, no matter what you get told by the people on the Facebook thread or whatever, is that you have fun. If you're there with your friends from school or from wherever else you met them, and you guys get together and have a great day, and you guys are proud of what you achieved on that day, I thought this move was really cool, or whatever, that is a day well spent. That was worth the time to do it. So number one thing, because that affected us in the younger days, was that we'd feel disheartened, what's the point of doing this shit? But that's the wrong attitude to have. If you've got that passion to do it, where you all want to get together and just have a great day, irrespective of the quality of the show, you're already a step in the right direction. Number two, the way that the quality of the show is going to improve is not because the base itself helps to improve the quality of the wrestling. You already have good wrestling skills inside you. If you're going to be a good wrestler, you already have that skill set in its embryonic stages, developing. The base, all it does, will give you the confidence to go, now I can take a clean bump. Yeah. Now we can do a suplex and our feet aren't going to go off the edge, Now there's not going to be a gap in the mattresses and we're going to be hitting the floor. And so it's like, it's safe. You're safe to actually say, I don't have to worry about how this clothesline's going to look, because I can just take a clean bump and it's going to look good.
Yeah, and what they do at the moment is, I don't even know why it ended up getting to talking about these blokes.
Oh, why not, Why not?
I suppose, but, they'll brawl all around the yard, but when it's time to do a move, they'll make their way back over to the mattresses and do a move onto the mattresses. It just takes...
And it ruins the flow of the match as well.
Completely.
I'm sure for them as well. Because I remember back when we were doing UWF, and I'm sure when you guys did some XCW, would have had a little bit of it as well.
Yeah.
Although you guys had a different style, but regardless. It does feel awkward as you're actually wrestling the match, thinking to yourself, alright, we're going to have to work our way back to the mattress or whatever it may be.
And all credibility.
To hit the move, because you as wrestlers, I'm sure those guys already wish that, I wish we could just go out and have a kick-ass match and not have to worry about it, because I'm sure they're capable of doing a lot better. It's just they're not in a position at the moment to produce that quality of match because of what they're restricted to at the moment. So that's definitely not on them, but if they want to improve to that level and stop getting all the negative feedback and stuff like that, they are going to need to...
they're going to have to embrace evolution.
Pay the $150, go down to Bunnings, get the plywood. Like the tires will be free.
Yeah.
Because otherwise the tyre place will have to pay money to dispose of them. So they'll load up the trailer for you. Yeah. 30 tyres, get some plywood, nail it on.
This goes for anyone else.
Put a bit of padding on top of the wood.
I know there's a lot of people out there. There's this kid in Albany who's just started up this new little backyard fed. Listen to this. This is what you need, man. You need the plywood. You need the tyres.
Yeah, you need... The tyres are the main component of the base, really. So go down there. It'll be free. They'll load your trailer up. Make sure you have some space. You want a little bit of space on the outside of the base. Not so you can do outside of the ring stuff, but just for safety reasons. You need a little bit of extra space on the outside. Put your plywood on top of the tyres. Put your mattress or I recommend sort of eggshell foam. Put a couple of layers of that. If I'm going to say anything else, it's that don't make the base too small or too big. I'd recommend about probably between 3.5 and 4 meters by 4. So that'll give you a good enough space where it essentially is like a small wrestling ring worth of space. But if you have it too big, then you're not going to be able to kind of do a lot of fast-moving sequences. It's going to be too spread out. And if you have it too small, obviously, you're still going to have the same logistics issues that you would have had on a mattress where, my feet are going to come off or, where's the room to bump? So I guess if we're just quickly touching on that topic, that's what I would recommend to everybody out there planning to build a base.
And me too, definitely. So let's continue on with this discussion about ICWS.
Right.
And talk about someone that you know quite well, MC Cruel.
Right.
Australian Backyard Wrestling Hall of Famer now. Been doing pro wrestling for a few years now.
Since it's about 5 years now.
Yeah.
It's going to be coming up on 5 years that he's been in the grind.
Yeah.
Doing the pro stuff.
Doing the pro stuff here in Perth. And so just some memories on times back then with MC Cruel. And
well, I mean, he was
and you feud with him,
my best friend. So we naturally, the two of us, we wanted to be the men in that fed, And also MC, I'll just fucking say it, Eli. He always had the skills that were a bit above everybody else's because this was a person that
and you can tell when you watch some of that early
You can
footage.
definitely. He already had the. I'm not going to say the basics, but I'm going to say that he already had the mechanics of wrestling a match down. He knew straight away that it needed to look good.
And just the way his body moves as well.
He knew that you needed to make a bump look good in order for the overall match to look good, rather than having that kind of selfish mentality of well, I don't want to look worse than this guy, so I'm not going to take the best bump. He knew that, you had to throw yourself into everything that you're doing. And he would, I mean, obviously he's come night and day since then as well, but I remember that back from day one he was able to kind of develop spots around the really flashy shit that he could pull off at the time, He might be like, well, I can take this bump really well, I can take a atomic drop bump and make it look really well. So we would work that into the match, you know.
Yeah.
So at least there would be a few highlights in the match. The feud was just one of those things where you know somebody so well, you know. He always knew my limitations around my disability and things like that, so I was always comfortable having a match with him, and it was always a physical match because me and him come from that same background of, like, you know, make it look good, lay it in.
Yeah.
And so really, I had a lot of fun doing that feud. It's one of my favourite feuds of all time because it was just an all-encompassing thing. It would be like 24/7. How can we make this better? What can we do to make our feud stand out more this time? Like, what can we add to this match, you know? What did we learn at training that we can work into this match? And I would definitely say the pinnacle of that would be the match we had at Twisted Metal 4, but I kind of would like to discuss Twisted Metal 4 in its own right.
Yeah, sure thing. So you just touched on it before, and I guess people who might be listening to this might not be aware about your disability. So go into that and tell me, you know, how hard it's been for you over the years dealing with your disability.
I have what's called mild spastic diplegia. Yes, I use the word spastic. Yes, it is offensive when you use it in a pejorative way to describe a person with a disability. So, but the layman's term is cerebral palsy, affecting my muscles in my legs and in my hands and in my abdomen. So, like, I can't do a sit-up, for example. And I remember back when my cousins and everything started to get into wrestling, and we would too because we were close with our cousins, years away from even starting UWF, but I remember one of my cousins saying, Daniel, you know, I'm really sorry, I love you, but if anyone's, like, the last person out of us that's likely to become a wrestler is probably you, you know, because of my disability. And I, you know, that sweet of him to say it like that, but I actually ended up being the only person to become a wrestler. So, you know, suck shit, Matthew. And it has been hard. It affects sort of every facet of existence, kind of like whether it be you're trying to work up the confidence to, like, ask a girl out, or whether it be just anything, like going up and down a set of stairs. But I think with wrestling, a lot of people out there, most people say, oh, DJ is my favourite in WZWA, I really enjoy your work, you know. A lot of really positive feedback, which I appreciate, but what people don't realise is that I've been wrestling since about 2007. So going on 8 years this month, actually, or just last month. I've been happy with my wrestling ability for about, like, 14 months now. 14 months.
Yeah.
And that is because the knowledge and everything else that surrounds my wrestling and performance was there before my actual wrestling started to be at a level where I felt like I could actually believe people when they said that I did a good job. Because that is one of the things that I would credit the pro training with giving me, is that learning that every wrestler, no matter what you think you see on WWE, all of those guys probably can do an international spot with a leapfrog and things like that, but everyone there is their own act, and they have their own style. You know, Santino Marella's not going to go out there and take the bumps that Dolph Ziggler takes, but he still got just the same crowd reactions based on his own merit. So once I adopted that attitude of, like, well, you know, maybe I can't do a flippy whippy off the top rope or whatever it may be, but I can throw a stiff clothesline and I can take a really hard bump that makes somebody else's move look good. Once I worked out how to mesh that with my already natural personality, which I've always been happy with the personality side of my wrestling, then I started to get comfortable with wrestling with a disability, to the point where I felt like it wouldn't slow me down, and where I can actually work matches now that I feel are high-paced. And, you know, like my match with Ryan Tate, like one of his first matches, that was very high-paced. That was about 5 or 6 minutes of just non-stop, and that was the first time I managed to pull off a match like that, even though it didn't go for that long. time-wise, the actual pacing of it was just bang, 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 you know. So once I started to be able to achieve that level where I could feel like I could have a good match against anyone, then I started to really get the confidence to develop as a wrestler into what you now watch today, currently. So,
okay, so as the ICWS is now moving along, you've now moved to the Z Arena, Dan Zeppelin and Chris Zeppelin's house. Now let's get into the next era of the ICWS. Let's say we're up in about 2009, and you've got guys like Blaze and Big Mac are starting to leave, but then you've got new guys coming in like Mike Del Carmo and JD Flame. Yeah. And then of course SPWS rocked up.
Well, I think I'll let you finish.
Well, I just want to say, how would you, describe that part of the ICWS?
Well, I think that sort of the late, sort of early 2010 to early 2011 was kind of like the marquee year for ICWS as a overall federation, if that's the term. For me personally as a wrestler, it was a real down period, because that's when I really was feeling like, because of my disability and stuff, that I was just no longer on the level of anyone in the Fed, because everyone developed their own skills, and a lot of people were, not that I wasn't happy to see it, a lot of people becoming great wrestlers, but from a promotional standpoint, as like one of the people that ran ICWS and kind of the quality of the shows, Delcano came in, blew us all away. He's always had those natural technical skills. He just knows every kind of pinning combination, every kind of submission. He's got counters for your counters.
Yeah.
JD Flame came in and also had that really solid in-ring work ethic, coupled with that really great personality that he brought to it, which Mike didn't so much have that much personality, but Justin or JD Flame didn't quite have the same level of in-ring acumen. So once those guys came in, and then combined it with SPWS, who came in, obviously Luke and Josh, Ice and Chaos, are now really close friends of both of ours, so we know them well. But when they came in, they added that really old school kind of Mick Foley, kind of like hardcore element to it. So we now had a group of, we had some entertainers, then we had the guys that could go hardcore and put themselves through the pain to get a match over. Then we had the guys that were just straight up great in the ring. And then we had a couple of guys over there where you would watch them kind of for a specific reason, like, Steel Kemsley, we'll talk about him later, but he brings something to the table where you pay attention and watch when he's performing, because you want to see what only he can bring to it, So we had a really well-rounded group of wrestlers by that point, and then once we started bringing in the XCW guys, as I'm sure we're going to get to next, that's when we really hit the prime, because we were just going out there and putting on shows that were on par with the backyard wrestling from over east that we'd grown up and watched. And at that time, a lot of those feds were dying down and becoming inactive, so we were pretty much the representation of Australian backyard wrestling, and we were really proud to carry on that tradition.
Yeah, we'll get to that part in a moment.
Right.
We'll get to the XCW part in a moment, but during this time, transitioning from 2009, 2010, just before XCW really came on board, there was a guy who had been a big part of the ICWS at this point. It was starting to, I guess his interest might have started to be waning a little bit, and he was, on the out of his time in backyard wrestling, which is your brother, Wicked Nick James. And I want just to ask you what Wicked Nick James means to the history of ICWS, and why you feel he is an Australian Backyard Wrestling Hall of Famer, which he was inducted into the January class of this year.
Well, if you compare Nick's body of work to that of, say, Chris Cryptic, then you'd sort of say, well, why is Nick in the Hall of Fame and Chris Cryptic? They're just not in the same league. But what you have to remember is it's a contextual kind of thing. It's Nick was not only one of the original founding members of UWF/ICWS, but he was like, first of all, the money came out of his savings account that paid for the base. So that's the first thing. So from a production standpoint, that was really important. Secondly, he was that workhorse kind of wrestler. Before Dan Zeppelin developed into the wrestler that you know him as today, Nick filled that role with MC Cruel, where we would put them two in the main event and they would just steal the show by having a match which was comparative to what everybody else was doing was out of this world. He was a natural heel. He knew all the tactics. He knew the way to convey this kind of almost casual in how smug and arrogant he was. Like, he really could take it or leave it, you know. The way that he would carry himself was that we needed him to be around, not the other way around. So he commanded that respect. And I think that his legacy is just being the guy that was there to provide those great matches through that transitional period into being quote-unquote shit, you know, to being good.
Yeah.
So, pardon me, early 2010, around the time when me and MC started doing the pro training and things like that, we used the skills that we learnt to try and elevate other people. I mean, Nick was still going out there and having the matches that laid the foundation for Dan Zeppelin to become the wrestler that he would later become. I Wrestle 2.0 in January 2010 was a turning point for that. Nick had this fantastic main event against Dan Zeppelin, who up to that point wasn't quite... He kind of arrived in that match. Nick was the one that was always ready to take a beating from MC. He was the wrestler that was always able to make guys like me, who weren't that great in the ring, able to make us look good. One of the first people to fall to Clint Marshall made Clint look like $1 million. You know?
Yeah, he did, and that was a part of that. You know, when I was making his music video for his Hall of Fame induction, that's what I was noticing later on, is he's putting over Mike Del Cano, he's putting over Clint Marshall. I'm pretty sure he put over Mykonos as well. I think that might be one of his last matches that he had.
He put over Mykonos.
Yeah, so he was, you know, so
what
like he was cool with
if I could, and a lot of those guys as well. I mean, Nick was always really cool about it and casual, as long as the match was good and people weren't. His big thing was that he expected people to treat him safely. He was really against the idea of putting yourself through all this stupid amount of pain to make a match look good. He knew that you could make a match look good and actually enjoy doing it.
And not kill yourself to do it.
You wouldn't have to kill yourself. And so if I could put it in a nutshell, the reason why Nick James is in the Hall of Fame is a lot like how Just Mike is in the Hall of Fame, which is for their service to backyard wrestling.
And I hope if anyone from the East is listening to this, you can understand where we're coming from when we're talking about a Just Mike or a Nick James.
It's all about context. Just because, you know, guys like Nick or Just Mike are in the Hall of Fame, that's really irrelevant to what the people over East sort of think is really irrelevant, or what they consider is relevant, because it's not just about what your body of work was, how many times you neck bumped on the grass or whatever. It's about the service that you provided in molding backyard wrestling into what it is today. So in the context of like WA backyard wrestling, Nick is one of the top 4 or 5 most important people in the history of that.
I agree.
Of that development, sort of like, even if Chris Cryptic had been a shit wrestler, which he's not, he's one of my favourites to this day. But even if he couldn't work a lick, if he was moving around like Andre the Giant in there, he still would warrant that induction because of what he did for...
Because of his contributions
backyard wrestling over there.
And being known all around the world.
Yeah. So...
Well, good.
Hopefully that provides a bit of... like context to
Yeah.
the Hall of Fame. It's
Yeah.
not just nobody gets in there just because we think it would be cool.
Yeah.
Everybody has
has a reason to be in it.
why they're in there.
Okay, so now let's transition to the next part, which is Twisted Metal 4.
Right.
So obviously, yeah, you and MC Cruel is a double retirement match, supposed to be at the time.
That's right, because the week before I'd made my debut on a professional show, which was ironically, that was I Wrestle 2.0, the Schwa version, which they borrowed from us, that name. I shouldn't actually say it in such a sarcastic way. They asked us politely if they could use the name, and we said, yeah, sure, because we didn't, we thought that would be cool.
Yeah.
So I am ironically the only person to have ever wrestled on both the yarding and professional edition of
Awesome.
I Wrestle 2.0. And then 1 week after that, we'd basically gotten pressure from the people within the organisation, Schwa, to stop yarding, which was fair enough because we were going to start getting on the cards and stuff like that. So we decided what better way to have a last match and go out with a bang than against each other. And it was actually, I think it was my second time main eventing a Twisted Metal, but it was going to be the first time that I would actually feel confident that I could have put on a really good match. So I was really, basically it was like my first big main event show where I actually felt capable of delivering within those circumstances.
Yep.
And then Twisted Metal 4 would, of course, wind up becoming the penultimate event in ICWS history. I mean, if you think ICWS, you think back to those matches.
Delcano versus JD Flame.
Oh, yeah, that was JD Flame's debut.
Yeah.
Great little technical classic there. Mike just carrying... Well, no, I'm not going to say carrying, but JD was obviously quite nervous that day because we were all strangers to him, and his friend Mike, they went out there and had a classic. JD just immediately jumped into that role as a standard old school heel, which had been sorely lacking by that point. Just somebody to come out and just kind of go, shut up, like, to the audience. And so that just started it off on a great note, and from there we were just thinking to ourselves, I think that this, the mood lifted from that point,
Yeah.
because the base had been moved, it was a good size, we finally had, decent padding and stuff on there, the weather was good, all those other outside peripheral elements kind of aligned. Then we had the mask match, which normally those are just throwaways, but turned out to be good. The play group got squashed by Nick James in one of his final matches, and it was a good match because...
And it also was the last appearance of Big Mac.
Also it was... And that was... I was grateful for him for making that little appearance. Like, little things like that, that might have been only a really minor little appearance that he made on that show, but doesn't just make it that much more special that you can go back and go, oh, cool.
And I think it's kind of funny that me and Big Mac were at the same place at the same time. I've seen footage of him over the years, and
he's genuinely just a top bloke. He is a good human being. Like, he was always in wrestling for the social aspect of it, and just sort of did what we asked him to do without complaint and just wanted to have fun, and that was translated to when he would be on the shows. So maybe he wasn't the best wrestler, but shit was he entertaining. I mean, it was just like he's just had that personality that just you couldn't help but smile,
Yeah.
And I think so. Nick comes out there and destroys the play group. 3-on-1 handicap match, owns us all. It looks great because Nick always just puts 110% in when he wrestles. So Nick got a great little moment there on Twisted Metal 4, got a win, even though he wasn't really, by that point, sort of still a top level competitor. So that was really nice because that was, in a way, that was sort of like the beginning of his send-off.
Yeah.
So it was nice to see that. You had the SPWS guys, Ice and Chaos, they came out. I mean, it's kind of a curse. They introduced light tubes into yarding for the first time, but at that time, that match still holds up today. I challenge anyone to watch it and not say I can't believe these two beasts are going out there and having such a great hardcore match, and then every single bump that they're taking is clean. Every single move they're doing looks crisp.
Yeah.
It was such a... Everything clicked for that match, and I think after that match happened, that was when everybody went, we're fucking kicking ass on this show.
Yeah.
This show is on the level of where we've been aspiring to get to.
So after that, I guess, well, we've danced around it. We've talked about most of the matches on that card, except one specific one, an important one for me.
Well, this was this was the first time I met one of my closest friends now.
Yep. And
Mr. Colin Fury, a.k.a. Aston Crude.
That's right.
Debuted, became friends with Dan Zeppelin. Debuted at ICWS, had a quality little match against Dan Zeppelin. Quality.
Just a taste of what was to come.
And I remember feeling really privileged that was actually the title match, but my match with MC was going to go on after that.
Actually, it was non-title.
Non-title, sorry.
Non-title, yeah.
Sorry about that.
I hadn't warranted a title shot.
Yeah, well, they had a great little match, which in itself added another special aspect to the show, because who knew whether or not this guy was going to be back, but for that event, it was one of our budding top superstars taking on a guy from another promotion, so that was another element of the show. It just seemed like every match had some intangible quality to it. And then, of course, after that match, then you came to me versus MC Cruel, which was still to this day probably one of my top 5 matches. I mean, it went for a good 25 minutes. A lot of people that were confirmed fans of pro wrestling actually said that it was on par with a pro wrestling show. Hard hitting. I don't think a lot of people in ICWS, or maybe even XCW either, had seen a match to that point that was so physical. Submissions, really hard chops. Not too many high spots. There were a couple. I think we did like Mick Foley elbow drop off the base onto the outside, hip toss on the outside, and then Guy Talk got like a flying drop kick and sort of neck bumped it off the base.
Yeah.
Other than that, it was actually all just about wearing the opponent down. And then in the end of it, I took a super kick. MC was exhausted, so he collapsed, and then I fell on top of him exhausted as well, and kind of accidentally got the pin.
I was so happy that you got the win.
To get the win, and that was one of the
standing
first.
There hoping you were going to win that match.
One of the only times that I'd actually gotten the win over MC Cruel. And so to hear him actually say that he still considers that one of his favourites as well, after all this time, means a lot. I mean, I think if you go back and watch that show, it might be 5 years ago and we've all come a long way, but gee, it's an entertaining show.
Yeah.
And I'm not saying that to toot my own horn, because I was only responsible for a small part of it. As an overall social group and stuff, that was when we started to hit our prime, you know?
Yeah.
The only thing that would have made it better is if we had been friends, you and I, beforehand, and then you would have been more integrated into the sort of social circle, would have made it a bit better, but, you know, that would come later on.
That would come with time, and I just want to fast forward a little bit and get to, you know, this whole XCW invasion and what we did with that.
Right,
leading to Halloween Hell 2010, my favourite ICWS event.
That was a point of contention for me from a backstage point of view, because by that point I felt like the Zeppelin brothers were running the show. I remember the actual event itself was fantastic. Johnny V did not attend the show, so you had to pull triple duty, I believe.
Technically triple duty.
That was the first time you and I wrestled, and at that point I wasn't really on the level to have a really competitive match against you.
Yeah.
So you kind of dragged me to what I thought was a serviceable little match, you know.
Yeah.
Not as good as what we would produce later on, but and then there was the great match against the kind of two high flyers in Nick Ariel and Dan Zeppelin. Great little match against the two heels in Just Mike versus JD Flame, which that was kind of a Rock Hogan scenario where the crowd reaction kind of like brought that up. Then you had a few other matches. I remember the one that stands out the most is obviously Clint Marshall versus Diffuser. The two resident powerhouses of our respective organizations. Complete strangers. Go out there and just have one of the greatest matches I've ever seen in backyard wrestling. And then you had a great match against MC Cruel in the main event, because, you know, so much for the retirement a few months before.
And we're going over the matches here, DJ, but I want to know more about the backstage goings-ons with you and the Zeppelins. What's going on with you guys, and how are you feeling going into this XCW versus ICWS show?
Well, I was feeling at that point that ICWS was definitely reaching its zenith from a quality standpoint, so I was kind of conflicted because I was really excited with where the Fed was going, but I wasn't happy that I was kind of not consulted about the decisions, you know. Dan coming out at the end of that show and winning the title, I'm still not okay with it all these years later. Not because I have a problem with the title being put on Dan, but because it undoes everything that happened through that previous show and the time building up to it. The actual show itself was awesome. I think a lot of the guys, especially on the ICWS side, were really excited. I don't know how the XCW guys felt, but they came and they brought it on that day. And I think that elevated us as a Fed that was actually to be taken seriously. You know, we had an event of a really high magnitude, and it was the first time for a lot of people wrestling strangers, and they all rose to the occasion, and I think that really showed everybody that was in ICWS that we are capable of becoming really good. From a booking standpoint, I was on board with most of the results of that series, but I was not on board with the winning the belt, losing the belt at the end, because that undid everything that we'd been. You're the monster heel champion who's been holding Dan the underdog down. You've had 2 matches, or 3 matches maybe, no, 2 matches previously that day. The second one with MC was like a 20-minute long main event where you both got counted out, and it was a draw. So why would you then, from a character standpoint, give Dan the title shot?
I'll tell you what. It was.
I know that you were leaving to go pro and everything like that, but I'm gonna say, you know, it just, for me, it undermined what we had done for the rest of that show. It wasn't actually what happened with him winning the title; it was the time and place that title.
Yeah, and I didn't like it either, but I was told this had to be my last show. So
yeah, and of course. If you had had like a magnifying glass into the future, you realise now that you should have just gone and fuck that. I'm doing one more after that. I should have. I should have, definitely. Because really, what authority did they really have?
Yeah,
to sort of,
and look
but
at
in hindsight, you know, you're excited. You're about to make your pro debut.
Yeah.
You don't want to cross these people that at the time you still had a ton of respect for, and you wanted to do what you were told. So
yeah.
Yeah, I can definitely understand that, but I did not like the way that I was not told about it. If I had have been told about it, I would have taken it a lot less personally. Chris knew about it, you knew about it, Dan knew about it. Why did this stranger that we barely knew know about it, and not me, who's been helping run the Fed and talking about it non-stop every day at school for like the last 3-4 years? So that was my perspective on it. It's not a personal problem that I had with any of you guys. It was just kind of it just did not sit well with me. So yeah, I mean, that's
fair
really,
enough.
But that doesn't take away from the overall quality of the event. The event was a really, really good show, and I was happy with my performance as well at that event. I thought it was a fun little match. So if not a little one-sided, but I don't think I would have been in the position to do a really competitive match.
It was a little bit one-sided, but it was still solid. Well, I'm going to wrap things up just for now. We're gonna get back onto this with part 2. I've got a few things to do for the next 5 minutes, and then we'll get back into this. So that was part 1. Our talk with Nightstalker Daniel Johnston, and just hitting the zenith of the ICWS back in the day. And we certainly have a lot more to talk about. So we'll be with you for part 2 right after this.